when I was about 5, I had this friend, and we did everything together. We played in the yard, and we ran in the woods, and we did all the things that 5-year-old kids do. And Sally, my friend, she even got to go on trips with us. And here's the great thing about Sally is she was really talented, because if the car was full, she could ride on top. She was, of course, an imaginary. And imaginary friends are actually quite common, and they're even more common in only children, older children, and those who don't watch much TV. I, of course, fit into all of those categories at that time. So, when you have an active imagination, you have an imaginary friend, because you create a playmate. If you don't have a playmate, you create one. So when we're young, using our imagination is second nature. The world is at our fingertips. No adventure too far, no ability beyond reach. Several years ago, Bill went over to hang out with a friend of ours, Noah. I think Noah was about 5 at the time. And because Noah's parents had other things they needed to do that day. So Bill was hanging out with Noah, and Noah is really into superheroes. And so he had created a superpower for Bill, including a little fake zappy thing. Well, it wasn't fake, it was a real zappy thing. And they had to get from, I don't remember if it was downstairs to upstairs or upstairs to downstairs, but one way or the other, they had to get, and they battled all the whatevers they were battling, and they had the whole thing. And Bill was like, all right, cool, we made it, yay! And then Noah turns to him and says, well, that was just level 1. And so imagination, he could create a world for hours and hours on end. And all he needed is someone to say, yes, I'll play your game and I'll follow your rules. Though Bill was ready for a break by the end of that, of course. Fighting battles is hard work. Fighting. No, but imagination is not just for kids. Otherwise, it wouldn't be one of our inherent spiritual abilities, our 12 powers. And now it's possible as we've gotten older that we have bought into a more structured view of the world, but this doesn't mean that imagination is any less important. We use our imagination to see what career path we might want to take, or what retirement path we might want to take, what kind of home we might like, and how we might want to decorate it. We use our imagination to consider vacation locations and to visit the list of possible outcomes of important decisions. We use our imagination to conceive that there's a different outcome or solution than the one that is presently before us. The founders of our country imagined a different form of governance than the one that they were currently in. They had to use their imaginations to see that it was possible. The leaders of social rights movements imagine a more just world. When we are frustrated with a situation, our imagination whispers, well, here's a thought. Maybe something else. Thomas Edison said, to invent, you need a good imagination and a pile of junk. That's all you need, a good imagination and a pile of junk. I think an idea helps too, but you never know. And aren't we glad that there are and continue to be imaginative people looking for new ways to do things? Just to think about, put in perspective how far we've come, what the imagination can do. I'm going to tell you the History.com's top 11 innovations that have changed history. The printing press, the compass, paper money, steel, electric lights, domestication of the horse, transistors, magnifying lenses, the telegraph, antibiotics, and the steam engine. Those things have changed the world, along with other things, of course. So in Divine Audacity, the book we've been following, Reverend Linda writes that there are 3 parts to imagination: conception, vision, and embodiment. So with an invention, you need something different. You're like, okay, something different needs to happen here. That might be your conception. Like when, was it Ben Franklin who invented the bifocals? He was just tired of switching back and forth between his glasses, so he came up with something different. So there was a need for something different. Vision would be the creation phase, where we know what we want to create, and then there's all the messing around with the junk, to figure out how to put it all together. And then the embodiment is the final product. But what does this look like as a spiritual power to build a more wonder-filled life for ourselves? Well, Charles Fillmore wrote, "With our imagination, we lay hold of ideas and clothe them with substance." We lay hold of an idea and clothe it with substance. Whew. I know sometimes Charles Fillmore can be hard to read, but there's some really good zingers in there that you're just like, ooh, I don't know, that gets me excited. So where does this idea, we're going to lay hold of an idea, where does the idea come from? Well, all ideas come from one mind. So I'm going to read to you this paragraph from the book because it's just going to be easier than me trying to do it in Rachelese. So we're talking about in the beginning, God, that section of the Bible, the very beginning part of the Bible. She said, more revealing is the etymology of the Hebrew word bresh, well, we're just going to pretend that I said it right, translated into English as beginning. Bresh is derived from the root rosh, which appears in the King James Version of the Bible 598 times. 14 times Rosh is translated as beginning. More than 400 times, however, Rosh is translated as head, chief, or top. The headwaters of a river are the starting point or source, just as the source of all ideas is one mind, out of which all ideas flow. A chief is a principle. One mind is the principle or leading intelligence informing all ideas. The top is the summit or crown. One mind is the highest possible source. These shades of meaning lead to the truth that all I could conceive of stems from one mind, the origin of all that is, the beginning. So, not in the beginning God, but at the top God. Ooh, I like that. So, every new idea already exists in one mind. Now, I know we've talked about this before, but we'll talk about it again. You may be wondering where hurtful and negative ideas come from. And the truth is that they also stem from one mind. They are, however, filtered through the consciousness of the person who's having the idea. So, a person who is joyfully aware of their participation in the circle of prosperity may interpret the divine idea of abundance as sharing what they have or giving money to someone who needs it. A person who sees the world through a filter of lack and struggle may interpret the divine idea of abundance as the inspiration to steal. The idea of abundance is the same. It's about how we understand the idea and how we strategize to achieve that idea. So we can use our imaginations to create wonderful worlds of joy, and we can also use our imaginations to punish ourselves and others. So when I was about 10, I don't know if you remember, there was a reboot of Mission Impossible. And I was about 10 when that happened, and so we were watching it, and I thought it would be really fun to play secret agent, because I still have a very vivid imagination. And so the house we lived in at the time was the kind where it was like sort of a half basement, where the back was at ground level, but the front was underground. And right by the back window that was in the door was the washer and dryer. And so I decided to start playing secret agent, you know, so I'd come down the stairs and I'd be like, and then I'd, you know, do the thing, like all the secret agents, right? You know, to get to the laundry room and stuff like that. Now, the problem with this little game was when it got dark, because that door with a window in it was dark outside. And all of a sudden, playing secret agent with the bad guys that we were creeping around from, it got a lot scarier than just playing a game. And it took me a long time to unlearn that fear that I had created because I was playing Mission Impossible. It is amazing what we can do with our imagination. So that's just a warning, is a misuse of imagination, a worry. It's a warning how it can look, show up. So we can use our visioning power to change our perspective on past events and our belief of what may happen in the future. That could be a good thing. In the book, Linda uses the example of a fractured family, and she invites the reader to spend time imagining what a happy family gathering might look like. Who would be there? What would the conversations be about? What kind of food would they be eating? Who would they be around? And what, to imagine it as vividly as possible. To do this daily and let it become fresh and authentic daily. So the story might not be exactly the same every day, but to actually sit in that imagining power. Now, why would we do this? Because it changes our assumptions about what might happen and how. If we are certain that this particular thing is going to happen when so-and-so and so-and-so get together, well, that's really the only option. But if we imagine it in a different way, then maybe we open the space of possibility. Now, another thing we can use our power of imagination to is to rewrite the past. It's sort of what all time travelers are told not to do, right, is to change the past. Well, I always say you can't change the past, but you can change how you feel about it. And so this is part of that. You can use your power of imagination to go back to a situation that might be painful and say, well, I'm willing to see this in a new way. What might they be thinking, the other person or people in the situation? What might have their motivations be? What might have been their fears that motivated this choice? And, you know, what could have I done different in that situation? And you can actually, if you want to, reimagine the conversation, or have someone sit with you and reimagine the conversation with you, so that even if the situation has not actually changed what the actual facts of what happened, how we feel about it can change. And we can have some resolution around it, and then it's not holding us back anymore. And isn't that great to not be held back by our stories of how we were wronged in the past? Now, this is not delusional, of course, it's not saying, but it is claiming our right to have a joyful and free life. I want to have a joyful and free life, even if I was wronged, which is a more fun thing to do. Which story do you want to tell? So you can choose to live in that misery, or we can see it rightly and gain freedom. Now, the last part of imagination, according to Linda in her book, is embodiment. What does it mean to embody imagination? This is to live the truth we know. If you envision a peaceful world, then you are being called to fully embody the divine idea of peace. If you desire a kind work environment where people pitch in to support each other's ideas, well, maybe you are being called to demonstrate compassion, objectivity, friendship. We can use the power of imagination to fall into a cycle of worry about what ifs, or it can lift us up to a place of pure potentiality. It all depends on what glasses we choose to see the world through. And this reminds me of the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. Now, you're used to hearing this story in relation to abundance and gratitude, which is great, but I think it applies here too. So you probably heard it. Jesus is doing his thing. The disciples say, you probably should send everybody home because we don't have enough food to feed everybody. And Jesus is like, whatever. And so he takes the food that they have, which is, a few fish, some bread, and he blesses it, and he sends it out to be distributed to the people. And of course, there's way more than they need. Now, do you see how this can be a story about imagination? The disciples didn't see what was possible. But Jesus knew that it was possible to feed all the people. He saw it in his mind, and he made it come forth because he believed. And the people believed too because they believed him. It's amazing what can happen with that power of belief. It can work both ways, though. Be careful. So as we get to the, there's always a homework section. Because unity is supposed to be practical Christianity, and it works if you work it. It works better the more you work it. So that's why we have homework. Because listen to me talk about it for 20 minutes. Make it happen. So, Alice, from Alice and Alice in Wonderland, she said, "There's no use trying. One can't believe impossible things." And the Queen replied, "I dare say you haven't had much practice. When I was your age, I always did it for half an hour a day. Why, sometimes I believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast." So, how do we exercise our imagination and utilize this essential tool in our spiritual toolbox? Well, like the Queen, consider the impossible or the improbable. There was a time when the idea that people could get in a flying tube and be transported around the world was thought to be impossible. And that time really wasn't that long ago when you think about it. Now we think getting on a plane and hopping over to wherever, no big deal. I mean, sometimes it's a hassle, but it's really not a big deal. And it's relatively safe. So think about the impossible or the improbable. Be open to those new divine ideas that are popping in. They're popping in all the time. So another thing is if you find yourself worrying about a situation, give equal time to the thought of what if it all goes better than I could imagine. It's natural to wonder, what if this happens or what if that happens? Having a contingency plan is not a bad thing. However, when that becomes the ruler instead of a tool to just be on top of things, that's when it becomes a problem. So spend as much time in the possibility of how it happened if it all goes better than I could imagine. Use your imagination to see those wonderful possibilities. There's also the possibility of going ahead and doing the exercise of rewriting a painful time in your past. Revising it in a way that empowers you and lifts you up. Play with a child and let them lead the play. What are we imagining today? What are the rules to their game? I hear people talk, often when adults play with kids, the adults sort of say, well, what about, they kind of direct, what if you just let's just play by their rules, see what happens. In this time in our world, it can be easily to be inundated with news of the world, and a lot of the news can be really heartbreaking. It can be hard to pay attention and also stay centered in knowing our oneness with all beings. Now, I am mindful about how much exposure I allow myself to the news, But because there's a lot of rehashing that happens. And here's what's important to know about the news. Most of the news, they make money off of you paying attention for their advertisers. So, just saying, get the headlines and move on. But I choose to imagine a world where these issues are resolved. I choose to see a world where people learn to talk about their differences. I choose to see a world where people learn about each other and learn how to talk in kind ways instead of using violence. And with this image in mind, I can see that what actions might be mine to take to move forward to that vision of reconciliation and respect. Actually, just heard an article about a guy who wrote a book or a paper, anyway, scientist, real scientist. We're actually much less violent now than we have been. We're in the least violent time in our history. Just don't listen to the news. The actual numbers say, I mean, sure, there's little, bumps here and there, but the trend is down. So, what do we choose to focus on? Now, friends of ours are in Istanbul this summer. My friend Lauren works for the government, and since her husband is a high school teacher, he's been there the whole summer hanging out. And so when there was news, we heard the news on Friday that there was a coup happening in Turkey. My thoughts obviously went to them right away and wondered where they were and what was going on. I did not worry, but I was aware that they were there and that there was stuff going on. And the first chance I got, I hopped on Facebook because I knew that they would post there what was going on as soon as they had a chance. And indeed, they had posted that they were in their hotel and that they were fine. And as the night went on, they posted some really interesting photographs of things that they could see out the windows. And I'm sure they'll have some interesting stories to tell. And as the night progressed, I knew that my job was to continue to know the truth that they were okay. And not just them, but the whole country. To know that peace and love and that the people's will could and would prevail. And that it doesn't have to descend into violence and all those. But so not only were my friends going to be okay, and that they would continue to be okay, but that the whole country, these people that they'd learned to love in the weeks that they'd been there, would also be okay. And I imagine, being how my friend is also a social studies teacher, that this was going to be a great story and a way for him to help explain what's going on in the world to his students when he gets back and gets to talk with those high school students. So I went right there to oh wow, what's this? This is going to be a great way for them to, continue their mission of educating and making a difference in the world. I didn't spend a lot of time worrying about them. So we use our imagination to see the world around us. What we see is up to us. So, choose wisely.